Welcome back to the Religious Studies Podcast. We are diving into a fascinating area today where religious studies and psychology kind of meet.
Yeah.
And before we get going, I just want to remind you that this deep dive, as always, is AI generated, but has been carefully fact-checked by our expert.
That's me.
That's right. So listeners, today, our mission is to explore how researchers use evolution and cognitive science to understand why humans have religious ideas and rituals in the first place.
Well, it really is kind of a puzzle when you think about it.
Yeah.
You'd think that all the costs involved with religion, like resources, risks, sometimes even like health implications,
Right.
would sort of make it fade away over time, but it's not like that at all.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. And it's been around for ages.
It really has, and you'd think that evolution would favor, things that are practical, the survival focused.
Right.
But then you see all these massive gatherings, millions of people participating in rituals like the Kumbh Mela in India.
Yeah.
Or the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca.
Mm.
Just makes you wonder, what is the driving force behind all of this?
Well, that's where the idea of deep time evolution comes in.
Okay.
We as humans, I think, tend to get fixated on the Stone Age. That's when everything about our minds, was set.
Right.
But our evolutionary history goes way, way back millions of years. To really understand something as complex as religion, we have to look at the bigger picture,
So we need to look beyond just like the physical evolution of our brains and consider how cultural practices impacted our cognitive development.
Exactly.
Like maybe even as far back as Homo erectus using fire and tools.
Precisely. Think about it. Homo erectus was shaping their environment, working together, passing down knowledge long before Homo sapiens even came on the scene.
Wow.
Those cultural innovations probably played a huge role in shaping the brains we have today.
So it's like we're not just looking at the hardware of the brain, but also the software, the cultural programming that's been running for millennia.
Exactly. And some of that programming may have predisposed us to religious thinking.
Okay. How so?
Well, for example, our brains are wired to be incredibly sensitive to agency.
Okay.
Back in the day, if you mistook the wind for a predator, well, you lived to see another sunrise.
Right. It's better to be safe than sorry.
Exactly. But apply that same oversensitivity to the world around us, and suddenly storms become the wrath of gods.
Oh, I see.
And rustling leaves might be spirits.
So you're saying my totally irrational fear of spiders is like ancient religious thinking.
Well,
That's both hilarious and terrifying.
it is kind of funny.
Okay, so we've got this agency detection system going haywire. What else?
Well, there's also our fascination with what researchers call minimally counterintuitive ideas.
Minimally counterintuitive.
Yeah, these are concepts that are just strange enough to grab our attention,
Okay,
but not so outlandish that we just dismiss them entirely.
gotcha.
So imagine a story about a person who can walk through walls.
Okay.
It's weird, but it's also memorable. And guess what? Religious narratives are full of these kinds of ideas.
So it's like religion hijacks our attention by giving us something unexpected.
Yes.
Like adding a dash of hot sauce to a familiar dish.
A perfect analogy. And these ideas, they stick in our minds, get passed down, and become part of our traditions.
That makes sense.
Then you have things like our deep aversion to contamination,
Okay.
which probably helped our ancestors, avoid getting sick.
Right.
But this aversion might have also been extended to spiritual or moral contamination,
Okay.
leading to rituals of purification and ideas about spiritual purity.
So our instinct to avoid things that could make us physically sick might have become like a whole system of beliefs and practices about being spiritually clean.
That's the idea.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And it doesn't stop there.
Really?
This aversion to contamination can tie into what we call magical thinking.
Okay.
Believing that specific actions can influence outcomes, even if there's no logical connection.
So like rituals to ward off bad luck or appease spirits.
Exactly. From a modern perspective, it might seem superstitious, but it's rooted in these ancient anxieties about invisible threats.
Right. Okay. So we've got this agency detection, we've got counterintuitive ideas, and a healthy dose of magical thinking.
Right.
But there's one big piece of the puzzle we haven't talked about yet.
What's that?
Death. What role does death play in all of this?
Well, death is perhaps the most profound puzzle of all, wouldn't you say?
I think so.
Our brains are wired to understand that death is the end,
Right.
but we also have this powerful emotional connection to those who have passed, this lingering social presence.
Yeah.
We talk about them, we think about them, and in a way, they remain a part of our social world even after they're physically gone.
It's true. It's like our hearts and our minds can't quite grasp the finality of it all.
Exactly. And this disconnect between the rational understanding of death and the enduring emotional bonds,
Yeah.
well, this might explain why ancestor worship and beliefs about spirits are so prevalent.
Across cultures.
Yeah. It's a way of reconciling those two conflicting intuitions of keeping those we've lost a part of our lives,
Yeah.
in a different way.
Wow, that's really insightful. So we've got all these cognitive systems that might have made us receptive to religious ideas,
Mm-hmm.
but is religion itself just a byproduct of these systems, like an accidental side effect?
Yeah.
Or could it have actually provided some kind of evolutionary advantage?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It seems like it.
The byproduct theory says religion is just an accidental offshoot of our other cognitive quirks.
Okay.
But then you have the adaptationist view, which argues that religion actually helped us survive. And one of the key arguments in favor of that view is the costly signaling hypothesis.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is costly signaling, and how does it relate to religion?
Well, think about those religious practices that involve sacrifice or hardship. The idea is that these costly actions serve as reliable signals of commitment to a group. If you're willing to go through a grueling initiation ritual or make a significant sacrifice,
Right.
well, you're demonstrating that you're a true believer, someone who can be trusted.
So actions speak louder than words, especially when those actions are difficult or painful.
Precisely. You're proving your loyalty in a way that can't be faked.
Right, and that kind of signaling is incredibly valuable for group survival.
Exactly.
But hold on, if religion is all about group survival, why are there so many different religions?
Yeah.
Wouldn't one, like, super religion be more advantageous from an evolutionary standpoint?
That's a great question, and it leads us to a fascinating intersection between culture cognition and evolution. It's fascinating because this whole costly signaling thing in religion goes way beyond just the, big gestures.
Okay.
It's woven into like everyday life.
Oh, really?
Things like dietary restrictions, dress codes, even specific ways of talking.
Huh.
Like think about the Jewish tradition of keeping kosher
Yeah.
or the Muslim practice of fasting during Ramadan.
Right.
These practices, they might seem arbitrary from the outside, but they actually require real commitment and effort.
So it's like wearing a team jersey.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just about showing support. It's like actively participating in the team's values and rules.
Precisely. And these signals, both big and small, they're really effective at strengthening group identity and fostering cooperation. When everyone is invested in upholding the same standards, trust flourishes and groups become more cohesive, but more resilient.
Especially in challenging environments.
Exactly.
Okay, so in a way, the more you invest in signaling your commitment, the stronger the group becomes and the better its chances of survival.
Right.
But you were going to say something about the variety of religious expressions.
Yeah.
Even though this whole costly signaling idea seems to point toward a single dominant religion.
Right. The like one religion to rule them all scenario.
Yeah.
It's a question that has puzzled scholars for centuries.
Right.
But remember those cognitive building blocks we talked about?
Yeah.
Like our agency detectors, our love of those counterintuitive ideas. Those are like the universal ingredients,
Okay.
But the recipe can change dramatically depending on where you are and what your culture is like.
So it's like having the same basic ingredients, but ending up with wildly different dishes. Pasta in Italy,
Yeah.
noodles in China, tortillas in Mexico.
Exactly.
The core elements are there,
Mm.
but the final product reflects the local flavor.
Exactly. Think about the concept of a god.
Okay.
Most cultures have some version of this, powerful supernatural agent.
Right.
But the details, like their personality, their powers, moral code,
Yeah.
those are incredibly diverse, shaped by local ecology, social structures, historical events. The possibilities are pretty much endless.
So even with a shared tendency toward religious thinking, those thoughts are going to be molded by the world around you.
That's right.
So if that's the case, doesn't that give more weight to the byproduct theory of religion? Like if it was a direct adaptation for survival, wouldn't we see less variety and more uniformity?
That's a very good point, and it is one of the reasons that the byproduct veer has gained traction.
Okay.
It explains both the universality of those religious themes and the incredible diversity of their expressions.
Yeah.
But I think the costly signaling idea also has merit.
Okay. How so?
Perhaps religion started as a byproduct of other cognitive quirks,
Okay.
but then as human societies got more complex and cooperation became like essential,
Right.
well, the group level benefits of religion really kicked in.
So it's like religion was accidentally helpful at first.
Yeah.
Like using a screwdriver to open a paint can.
Mm.
It works,
Mhm.
but it wasn't designed for that.
Right.
And then as groups with strong religious practices started to kind of outcompete their rivals,
Right.
religion itself became subject to evolutionary pressure.
That's the idea. It's a process that's called exaptation.
Okay.
It's where a trait that evolved for one purpose ends up getting repurposed for something completely different. And in the case of religion, that new purpose might have been, promoting group survival through costly signaling, social cohesion,
Right.
and a shared moral code.
But it's not a simple byproduct versus adaptation.
Right.
It's more nuanced with these different forces interacting over time.
Exactly. And it really highlights the need to consider multiple levels of analysis,
Like what?
Gene's cognition culture and how they all intertwine to create this thing we call religion.
Hmm.
It's not about reducing religion to a single cause or function.
Yeah.
It's about appreciating its intricate history and all those various factors that contributed to its power and its persistence.
I see what you're saying. But this brings up another question.
Okay.
If religion is so intertwined with like our cognitive architecture,
Yeah.
is there something about how our brains work that makes us predisposed to believe?
That is a great question.
And how does that impact, how we approach religious diversity and pluralism in the modern world?
Those are really big questions.
They are?
But before we get to them, I think we need to explore another exciting area of research.
What's that?
How specific religious practices might actually influence brain activity.
Wow.
This is where the field of neurotheology comes in.
Neurotheology.
Yeah, a field that is both intriguing and controversial in equal measure.
It's like we're taking all this evolutionary and cognitive theory and grounding it in the physical reality of the brain.
Yes.
We're actually peeking inside people's heads while they're engaged in religious practices.
It certainly is a bold endeavor.
It is.
And the findings so far have been quite thought-provoking, wouldn't you say?
So what are neuroscientists actually finding, when they look inside the brains of people doing religious stuff?
Right.
Are we talking like meditation prayer or something even more intense?
Well, it's all of the above.
Oh, wow.
Researchers have used, brain imaging techniques like fMRI and EEG
Yeah.
to study a wide range of practices from quiet contemplation to like ecstatic rituals.
Wow.
And while it's still early days, there's some pretty fascinating patterns emerging.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, for instance, some studies have shown that certain areas of the brain associated with social cognition
Okay.
and emotional processing,
Yeah.
well, they light up during prayer and meditation.
So when people feel connected to God or a higher power,
Mm-hmm.
their brains are firing in ways that resemble how we connect with other people.
Yeah.
So does that mean our brains don't really distinguish between the divine and the human when it comes to these feelings of connection?
It's a compelling possibility, isn't it?
It is.
It fits with the idea that we tend to conceptualize our relationship with the divine using, the language and metaphors of human relationships.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about God as a father, a king, a friend.
Yeah.
It makes sense that those deeply ingrained cognitive systems we evolved to navigate social interactions might also be recruited for, religious experiences.
That's incredible. But I bet there are some people who feel uncomfortable with this idea of reducing religious experience to just brain activity.
Oh, I'm sure.
It almost seems to imply that faith is just a trick of the mind, like a neurological illusion.
It's a valid concern, and it touches on that, age-old mind-body problem.
Yeah, where does the mind end and the brain begin?
Exactly.
Can we truly understand one without the other? These are questions that philosophers have been debating for centuries.
That's right.
So neurotheology is raising just as many questions as it's answering.
Well, probably.
Not surprising, I guess. But even if we acknowledge the limitations of these studies, they still seem to be pointing to something profound. If specific brain regions are consistently activated during religious experiences across cultures,
Yeah.
wouldn't that suggest there's something fundamental about these experiences? Something rooted in our shared neurobiology?
Absolutely. And that's, one of the most exciting aspects of this research.
Yep.
It's highlighting the deep connections between our brains, our minds, and, our spiritual impulses.
It's not about proving or disproving religious beliefs,
Right.
but rather understanding the biological underpinnings of religious experience.
Exactly.
And maybe, just maybe, those insights can help us bridge some of the divides that exist between people of different faiths.
Well, yeah, I hope so.
If we can recognize that our brains are wired for these kinds of experiences, perhaps it can foster more empathy and understanding.
It's a hopeful thought, isn't it?
It is.
Imagine a world where we can appreciate the shared neurological foundations of our spiritual yearnings,
Yeah.
even as we celebrate, the diversity of our beliefs and practices.
Well, I think that's a beautiful place to end our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We've journeyed through, the cognitive building blocks of religion,
Yeah.
explored the evolutionary pressures that may have shaped its development, and even peeked inside the brains of people, engaged in religious practices.
We did a lot today.
It's been quite a ride.
It certainly has. And if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this conversation, it's that religion is complex.
Yeah.
It's multifaceted. It's not something that can be easily explained away or reduced to a single cause or function.
Right.
It's a product of, our evolutionary history, our cognitive architecture, and this rich tapestry of cultures that we inhabit.
And as we continue to explore these intersections of religion, psychology, and neuroscience, I'm sure we'll uncover even more fascinating insights into the human spirit.
I think so, too.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey, and until next time, keep asking those big questions.